We're going to take a look at a new story called Spoons, and I'm going to write this right now. I think I have an idea of where I want it to go, but we'll see if it works out. As she cried, he carved. She couldn't wipe the tears away fast enough. Before the persistent pain brought more. He turned the utensil over in his bony fingers and slid the blade along the bottom curve of the bowl. The spoon took shape, and the rough edges grew smoother under his expert touch. Her joints creaked as she tried to rise from the bed. A small gasp with a high-pitched groan under it escaped her. He paused only a moment and then returned to his work. His own white fingers ground together at their uncushioned connections. She took one step at a time, releasing the support, leaving the support of the headboard behind. Her bare feet would not straighten as her arches cramped, and she hissed through the agony, one uneasy step at a time. She reached for the back of a chair and missed. He paused again from his carving. a blade in one skeletal hand and the unfinished soup spoon in the other. His work here might be done, but she did not fall, despite making a show of losing her center one direction and then the other. Her monkey-like toes held the floor and kept her up one more time. He stared with empty black sockets at the angry red pallor. I'm not sure if that's the right word. It doesn't even recognize it as a word, so I'm guessing it's not. Pallor, paleness. Well, no, that wouldn't be right, because pallor would be a white color. Angry red. Angry red. Let's just say inflammation. All right. Around her toe knuckles. He stared at with empty black sockets at the angry red inflammation around her toe knuckles. He decided she would need all the spoons she could get today. He returned to carving and considered inside his exposed skull. He returned to carving and considered inside his exposed skull that maybe he should carve more teaspoons for expediencies. I didn't think I was going to spell that right. I'll put an N in and see if that's enough. Nope. Expediencies. Expediency's sake. Okay. He had to carve what the bone wanted to be. Alright, is teaspoons a compound word? Oh, I guess it is. Alright, teaspoons for expediency's sake. He had to carve what the bone wanted to be. This humorous. I don't even know if I'm going to be able to spell the different types of bones right. No. This, I'll just say arm bone and I'll look it up later. This arm bone wanted to be a soup spoon. She forced on her shoes with gritted teeth and wrapped herself in a shawl guess that's right. Wrapped herself in a shawl. She had crocheted herself in the distant past before her fingers had betrayed her. She really intended to go out, even on this day of acute suffering. The skeleton in the corner on the edge of her bed held out the unfinished spoon. She took up 3. Hey man, thanks for dropping in. She took up 3 small spoons carved from bone and sitting, waiting on the kitchen table. 3 were not going to get her very far. Alright, I need a name for the dog. Pugs barked a little yip and hobbled toward her from under the couch. If any animal could understand her suffering, Pugs was the guy. He tried to yip again, but only let out a breathy sound as he hobbled forward again on his misaligned hips. I'll do my best, she said, as she opened and closed the door, leaving the little dog and the skeleton with the knife. Let me go ahead and spell skeleton right. And the skeleton with the knife in the apartment. As the locks clicked into place, one after the other, he felt sure he could imagine the pain each of those key motions created. Then the bony occupant of the apartment realized Pugs was looking at him. He had no tongue to comfort or scold. Instead, he ground his yellowed teeth together. Pugs whimpered and found his way under the couch again. He returned to carving the soup spoon. From the remains of the arm bone. She would need this and many more besides once she got home. As he feared, she used up her 3 spoons long before she returned home. He and Pugs both stood outside the door, listening to her cry as she fought with the key and locks. She had created a painful trap for herself. Pugs whimpered. Pugs whimpered back. He set down a teaspoon among the others he had finished while she was gone. She got inside, as he knew she eventually would. She managed to close the door, but just barely. No locks would be turned to protect her or Pugs tonight. She fell into bed, and Pugs quietly hobbled to his dish to finish off the dry food. There would be no fresh dinner tonight. Certainly not any that required opening a can. He turned, causing his hip bones to clack against his lower ribs. If anyone came to harm her, he was supposed to do nothing. That was the way of life, suffering, and death. Part of him knew that if someone wandered in here tonight, that he would bend the rules as he carved flesh from the intruder's bones and then made spoons of them for her as she whimpered in her sleep. It was good fortune that no one tested her door or his knife that night. Alright. Don't know if I have the scene break in the right place. That'll be fine. Do I just go straight into the next morning? I'll go ahead and put a scene break. I may take this next scene break out, but we'll see how that plays out. All right. She stayed in bed most of the day, even with her swollen hands. Looking fat enough to pop like overripe fruit. She opened 2 cans during the day to make up for pugs getting no treats the day before. Little dog's eyes were mournful. About what she suffered in order to be kind to him. He reached down to pet the dog, but Pugs gave a yap like he'd been stepped on. She was already half asleep again as she mumbled, "Sorry, I didn't see you there." He sat at the kitchen table with bone chips and curled slivers of ivory gathering around his bony feet. He created spoons of all shapes and sizes. Some had intricate designs in the handles. Those would do quite well for her. Those would do quite well for her once she felt up to going out again. Those would do quite well for her once she felt up to going out again. Alright. He even carved a 3-pronged spork out of a yellowed plate of hip bone he had. That night, her friends called. To his surprise, she agreed to go out with them. He had carved her many spoons already, but he feared they would not be enough. Even pugs stared up from the edge of the kitchen in disbelief. She limped hard to the right as she hung up. He knew she wouldn't fall. She just wasn't the falling type. After gathering the pile of spoons in both her swollen hands, they clicked together on her way to the door. Struggling to pull it closed with her elbow, he took hold of it and closed it for her. I'm going to add a sentence in up here. Pugs lowered to the floor as she went. It wasn't a long journey for him, but it took effort anyway. Both getting old, Pugs. Alright. She laughed. She laughed with a jagged edge. He considered the dog from the darkness behind his empty eye sockets. She still had vitality despite everything. But Pugs was barely holding on. He could smell it on the dog. He could smell it on the dog through the hole for his nose. Say holes for his nose. Alright, he closed it for her. Alright. As he turned, the dog heaved for breath on its side. The skeleton approached, but Pugs gave no protesting yip this time. He leaned down, reaching with one bony hand and splaying his skeletal fingers. Pugs rolled his eyes and focused on drawing breath. He petted the dog for the first time. And his breathing and the animals breathing settled. He returned to carving spoons. Carving spoons from scraps of bone. She returned late with 2 spoons to spare and a smile on her face. Pugs livened up a bit to cover how badly he was doing. She was in such a good mood that she bought the dog's poor acting. They both made it through the night, and the guy she met called the next morning. We'll say Greg was good for her. He read her well and knew when she was out of spoons. She wasn't the type to tell anyone, so it was good that Greg was observant. It saved her from having to work too many locks on her bad days. He carried pugs as they got ready to go down to the car. She picked up the new spoons from the edge of the table and dropped most of them immediately. The ones she managed to hold on to, she held tight. Greg saw it. He might not understand everything about the spoons or the skeleton that carved them for her. Let's say unseen skeleton. The unseen skeleton that carved them for her as fast and as well as he could. Making it look like butter. Thanks, man. I wasn't real confident in this story when I started, but it's coming together well. I like the emotion in it too, I think. Greg saw it. He might not understand everything about the spoons or the unseen skeleton that carved them for her as fast and as well as he could. But he took her elbow as he cradled pugs, and they walked at her pace out the door with what spoons she had left. There would never be enough. There would never be enough for what she had to face today. He sat down in his usual spot, which was where Greg normally sat now. He had no ill feeling about giving up his favorite carving spot at the table. If anything, he felt a thrill inside the bone cage of his ribs, maybe in the place where some kept their hearts. He felt it every time Greg made her soup, held her as she cried, or especially when he made an excuse not to go out. He felt a thrill inside again, but this one was dark and it sunk through his frame. Pugs was never coming home. He knew it, and he thought she and Greg must know it too. He was quite observant. Alright, this will be the last section, I'm pretty sure. She might never get over it. Not completely. As he sharpened his knife and Greg brought her a coffee, he was glad that Greg knew better than to just buy her another dog. That wouldn't have helped. Not yet. As she leaned on his shoulder and held the mug for warmth instead of drinking, the dog yipped and crawled out from under. No, it's not making noise here. The dog scratched and crawled out from under the couch. She and Greg could not hear him, of course. He watched them and imagined what it must feel like to be able to experience warmth. He decided it must be like holding the best spoon. The dog waited patiently at the skeleton's feet. He looked down at Pugs, now made entirely of bone. The little dog looked very much like the smallest dinosaur now. He had something in his teeth. The skeleton reached down and took the largest femur bone from Pugs that he had seen in years. He had to hold it up just to confirm it was indeed human. If he had a tongue to speak, he would ask Pugs where he found it. It didn't matter, he supposed. He returned to carving as she took comfort from her coffee and his warmth. This large bone would make a fine serving spoon. It would have a deep bowl and could probably dip cups full of punch. It would be a fine spoon. Let me break that. I'm going to make the last two sentences separate so they hold a heavier impact. It would be a fine spoon, and he had plenty of time to carve it as Pugs curled up at the skeleton's feet. And that is Spoons. I didn't know where that story was going to go, but I am pretty proud of it. Of course, I'm going to edit. Part of the idea of this kind of came from a internet story that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. It talks about chronic pain and chronic illness, and it says it's very much like using. You have a certain number of spoons when you start the day. You don't know how many you have. And as you go through the day, every time you're doing something, you're having to give up a spoon. And then once you're out of spoons, you're kind of out of energy for the day. When I was dealing with kidney failure, that analogy very much stuck with me, and it's one that I've seen people use as sort of a shorthand for suffering. The idea of I'm out of spoons, and so I kind of imagined, okay, well, as I was trying to figure out what the story was about, where would those spoons come from? So these imaginary spoons, and it always struck me as odd that it was spoons. Okay, it's such a oddly specific thing, and it resonated with people so well that it really is sort of a shorthand for chronic pain. Like I'm out of spoons is something that a lot of people who go through chronic pain understand. I've even seen it on websites where people who are dealing with chronic pain or chronic kidney failure in particular will use that terminology, or it'll be on the site, and it's just kind of the thing that people understand. So like in imagining that, I wrote the word spoons on my board as a story idea, and I had no idea what it was going to be. But there was just something about it that was odd. It was almost like this mystery, that the fact that it was a spoon meant that somebody was making the spoons. And of course, you could make it God, you could make it some protecting angel or something like that. But I kind of like the idea of a skeleton because we associate it with death. But this skeleton is having to carve the spoons out of bone. There's no really explanation for where the bones are coming from and why she's picking up the spoons without realizing she's doing it. But I kind of like that this is sort of the mystery backstory of where that's coming from.